muttering under my breath about exasperating humans.
As you walk around the corner of the camp, you hear him shouting at Volo and Guy and see them scrambling out of their morning haystacks that they excuse for beds. And he seems very frantic to get as prepared as possible for some mysterious reason. Alright, the four of you arrive very shortly at Anders' tent, where Sasha, as usual, is standing outside of it with her arms crossed, a fine engraved sword hanging from her hip.
As we approach, I want to ask Fervent Vertstad, was that potion that you guys got from Frida last night, magical? Or was it just local herb lore, like she said it was?
It was just a wine that I have not tasted before.
That's one way to put it.
But not magical in any way. Got it.
I will shrug.
I feel like Vertstad's mind is like, I would have totally fucking called that thing magical.
You see what it did to my hands? Or no, the rest of my body, not my hands.
Alright, as the four of you approach, Sasha steps aside and gestures for you to enter.
Thank you, Sasha. And I will move past to Anders' room.
You nod, her eyes seeming to linger on you overtly, Vertstad.
Once Sasha's out of sight, Drac will give Verstadt a knowing look.
I'll look like I don't know what he's talking
about. As the four of you enter, instead of the large desk piled full of books, instead it seems like the room's been completely rearranged. And now there is a very nicely, beautifully carved from Lustrian timber table with just the perfect amount of space for the four of you and Anders to sit, with a nice even distribution of space between each of you. And piled high on the table are exquisite foods.
Drac will bow when he sees Anders and give a formal apology for not making it last night, and explaining that they had to solve some some incidents in the village on behalf of Silverhand.
He raises his hand and says, Now, I don't need an explanation. I know Silverhand can be very demanding when he feels something needs to be done. He often tends to prioritize himself above the rest of the waking world. And he gestures to the food and says, Now please, sit, eat. We don't want the food to get any colder. It's still piping hot.
That would be a sin, it would. I will grab as much food as I can, shovel on my plate, and devour it.
You notice next to the seat that was clearly made for you, because it's more of a high chair, to get you up to the same angle as everyone else, Anders seems to have, or whoever set the table, seems to have conspicuously put a labeled variety of pies that look amazing.
I will sit down and begin to eat, and I will say, do you happen to have a cook on hand for all?
He smirks knowingly and winks at you, Veriv, and says, well, let's just say that I like to keep some secrets lest others find out about all the goodies I keep in here. And he scoots a glass towards you full of full of some kind of wine, and gestures and says, although I'm afraid I don't believe that comes from your specific kingdom, I acquired this in a trade with the elves of the eastern kingdoms in Athelloren.
I will nod and take it and do like a smell test.
It is disgustingly exquisite.
And then a taste test, and then I will nod my thing.
You're doing all the snobby elf wine
Yep.
thing. Okay.
Yeah.
He points a knowing finger in your direction, Verve, and he says, "Now, feel free to indulge yourself, but leave the rest here. That glass is worth a lot."
I will nod and smile.
And then he turns to the dwarf and says, "Of course, can't forget the most important part." And he reaches down and pulls out a small cask and says, "I haven't even opened it. It's not Septuple X, I'm afraid, but it is troll brew."
Nice.
And he pushes it across the table to you and steeples his fingers expectantly.
Drac will open it. Uh-huh.
It is some not manlin beer. It is a put hairs on your chin kind of beer.
Drac will mention that one of the old Deadeyes that he used to serve in to claim to have had a drink with Bugman, and though he's not exactly sure on the accuracy of said tale.
Anders will nod and say, "Would you believe I have an entire shelf made up of tales of encounters with Joseph Bugman? It would be beyond a man's wildest dreams to encounter that brave dwarf, but unfortunately he doesn't come down into the realms of men too often."
I believe it. He's a ranger that puts the rest of us all to shame.
Indeed. I've seen the ruins of his brewery, you know. Terrible, terrible tragedy, that.
And a grudge that will never be settled.
He nods, and then he lets the four of you eat for a bit, and he kind of eats just little bits here and there before he politely says, "So, what did you get up to yesterday, I wonder?"
Sorting out problems for the local priestess.
Working out for mutant baby. This is very good. Yeah, great tart, lad.
He narrows his eyes at the halfling and kind of what? Look before he sort of ignores him and says, "Oh, you met Frida. Rather frightening figure she casts, isn't she?"
Can be quite polite if you don't have her pissed off, though.
True. Though, to stay on her good side requires... well, let's just say most people haven't had the best of luck with it. Do mind that one, though.
We did 2 tasks for her, so hopefully that will put us in her good graces for some time at least.
He chuckles and says, "In my experience, a task for Frida doesn't mean you get in her good graces, it means you get out of her bad graces."
I will frown.
Jack will smile, seeing the instant comparison to getting in and out of the Book of Grudges.
He sits back in his chair and says, "That being said, take it from me, don't let that one be your guide on a trip. She's more likely to lead you into the lair of some exotic, starving monster to feed it than she is to get you where you're going. Doesn't care much for people, that one."
I will blink.
He shrugs and says, "Tallites, what can you do?"
I don't know, what can you do? I have a feeling that I should know a lot more about Tall if I want to walk around these woods.
Anders lets out a mirthful laugh and says, "Yes, it's a shame that Frida is so guarded with her secrets for Tall. If the cult was more open in these parts, it would be much easier to do my research, I can tell you that much. So I think the plan will be to head up there later this afternoon, once the sun's at a reasonable level. We'll, of course, want to travel with plenty of light."
My lord.
He raises his eyebrow.
I did, without your permission, I apologize, invite Sir Raymond to come with us as a way of getting him to be less annoying. I proposed to him the challenge of the bear. that you sought to remove.
He laughs audibly. He says, "Ah, you got Ruben to come on a trip that Sasha's going to be on? Oh my, we might be in for a treat."
I glance at Sasha to see how she's feeling.
She stays up front. She
Did
did
they
not.
have a competition or something?
He almost chokes on the piece of bread he was chewing on before clearing his throat. He says, "You could call it that."
Or is he trying to court her?
I would say it's somewhere between the boy. I would say it's a mix of trying to court a wyvern that is actively seeking his decapitation. So it's a bit of both, I guess you could say.
I will mumble and say, I hope she will.
And Anders gives you Anders gives you a slightly disappointed pout look and say, "He's just a boy. You shouldn't be so hard on him."
He's also an annoying Bertoni.
How tough is he?
He frowns at this and says, "Riemann? Well, I'll put it this way. When Otto had his little incident down in Bretonia with, he sort of looks over at you, Verve, and he coughs politely and says, well, let's just call it an incident. Riemann performed very admirably against a horrifying creature that came from a place."
I will narrow my eye as he talks.
He frowns at you for a moment. He goes, "I don't suppose you've ever..." He frowns at you and he goes, "I suppose you know this better than most, but there are some nasty beings that exist in the Fey Forest."
I will nod and say, most of them are on purpose.
He nods and says, "True, but during the hunt, things can get a little out of hand. Should it come through Bretonia."
I will nod.
He says, "I don't intend to judge your people, Elf, no more than I would have you judge mine, but Raymond was acting in best self-defense as he could. His father, you see, was killed by... well, I believe the legends call him Orion."
Truly.
He nods and says, "The boy's father was brave, but it was a man versus a titan. There was no way he could come out on top. Riemann, though, took up his father's lance and was able to take down some of the strange stag riders that traveled with that band. And since then, he's earned quite a few feats for himself. He slew a basilisk, but a year and a half ago."
Ah, so he is very tough then. Do you think Sasha would find it amusing if I let slip that, say, I hear up in Kislev the strongest of men wrestle bears? Do you think he'd take the bait and try to wrestle the thing?
Anders
Sounds like he's tough enough to survive it.
Anders points a finger at you and gets a moderately serious look on his face and says, "Now, Master Wrist, I can't be sure if you're joking, so allow me to respond with, if you tempt that boy to wrestle what sounds like a true Reichland Great Bear without his weapons, I will ensure that you do not get to eat at this table again."
It is a mere joke.
But it does give me ideas.
He
Don't you dare.
he
Don't
whack-
eat my food I don't get to eat.
he waggles his fingers annoyedly at both of you and says, "Let's stay on task. So we need to get to the shrine later today, and he does pause for a moment, looks back at Wrist, and he says, "Forgive me, but did you say mutant baby?"
Yeah.
He sort
I
of
will look at wrist and just...
he sort of lets out a huh, like he was
Drop.
really expecting you not to say yes. And he sort of like waits for a good moment.
That is a story for another time and perhaps much stronger drink.
He nods slowly and says, "I wonder, And then he frowns at the two of you and says, "You said you did 2 things.
Yes.
Were there 2 babies?"
No.
No.
Killed some beastmen.
He nods. He scowls at the mention of Beastmen. He goes, "Oh, those degenerates!" And he sort of smooths out his robe and says, "I apologize. I've had quite the history with greenskins and beastmen in particular. And the beastmen around here are no joke."
Of course. I think we would have been in quite the ordeal had there been 2 of them.
He pauses for a long time and he says, "I don't want to know the details. It's not my business, but I assume you dealt with it?"
Yes.
And he nods and says, "Good. If something like that were to escape into the beastmen herds, it could potentially act as a beacon to rally more of them here if they think something's corrupting." That's terrible. He pauses and says, "Well, if you didn't see anything, if you were just slaughtering beastmen out there, that doesn't sound like anything I'd like to hear elaborated on then. Very well. We should prepare for our trip then." And he stands up and claps his hands and says, "I'll have Sasha grab my pack, and we'll get your travel supplies, of course, and then we shall make our way for the mountain. After we get Riemann, of course."
Very good.
He is prepared and ready by.
Strategically forgetting Ruben.
He frowns and he says, "In the event that..." Nah, I shouldn't need to say it. Well, he pauses and he looks really serious for a moment, and he kind of turns to the 4 of you and he says, "In the event, hypothetically, that Sasha, hypothetically, attempts to do something regrettable, I would be very remiss to see Master Riemann harmed."
Are you asking us to intervene?
He says, "I'm simply asking that you do your best to put the boy on the outside of stabbing distance. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. I don't think it'll come to that, but, better safe than sorry."
I will raise an eyebrow and I will shake. You're not the one that has to work with him. He thinks of me as a.
He chuckles and says, "Well, it sounds like someone got the bad end of the stick from Rolf. Perhaps that's where you should actually direct your anger."
Well, the other was removing sacred tree.
He,
So no.
Anders raises an eyebrow and says, "Oh, I know for a fact Rolf could have had you on many jobs, but I think Rolf very strategically wanted you to do the job where he thinks you would suffer the most, between you and me. You really think that with an elf with all of your skills and abilities, the only thing he could offer you was to either chop down trees that are probably important to your own culture and would hurt you as a being, or set you up with a person who has killed more of your kind than anyone else in this camp? You think that was an accident?"
I will narrow my eyes and say, I suppose not.
He holds up his hands and says, "I'm not making any accusations. All I'll say is Rolf is a grizzled veteran, and although he is many things, stupid is not one of them. Riemann, on the other hand, has the boldness of youth, is what I'll call it."
He's a beardling trying to prove that he's trying to act like a long beard.
"Sure. He's good-hearted. Everyone in this camp adores Riemann, and for good reason, even if he can be a bit Bretonian at times." But
Speaking of Rolf, what is the... I've never heard of the Bloody Hounds before. The company he leads. Does he lead it, or is he just one of the officers?
Anders frowns and says, "Oh no, Rolf leads this company, and has for many years. Their history is unfortunate."
Maybe discussions about their history then is for a different time.
He nods.
Over not such a fine meal. Wouldn't want to spoil it.
He nods and says, I think that would be best. Very well then, let's get ready to begin our journey. And he sort of makes a motion or he rings a small bell and Sasha comes in and starts clearing away the table.
I am sleight of handing food off the table into my sling bag.
Go for it.
Alright, 3 levels of success.
Go for it.
I don't think he would begrudge you doing that even if you were openly doing it.
Yep. Doesn't mean I'm going to try to be a little stealthy about it.
You successfully stealth some food. Alright, and with breakfast eaten, after a few minutes, Sasha comes out and drops, well, she doesn't drop them, but she hands a bag to each of you, and each bag has a small emblem stitched into the top of it that seems to have a symbol that vaguely is supposed to represent you, apparently. And Anders gets his own pack and puts on an outfit that is much more old hiker gentleman than dude in his robes and his own house gentleman. And he nods as he puts on a rather strange looking and rather eccentric straw hat. And he says, all right then, let's be off.
Is he in a safari, like a pith helmet?
Not quite, but rather close.
Okay.
The closest he can acceptably get to within this setting. And that's where we'll call it.
Okay.
Sounds good.
That's a good place to stop. That's a very good place to stop narratively, because shit's going to get really complicated in a little bit.
Almost midnight.
All right.
And not a cliffhanger this time.
No cliffhanger this time. Everyone on YouTube will be thrilled. All right. Let's do... yeah, that was a great session. Everyone did well. There was a very hard fight, and y'all survived it. 200 experience to everybody.
All right. Notice that that balance-wise, fights tend to be like very seesaw at the beginning, but then once a side starts winning, they start winning hard.
Yeah, which is how it's supposed to work, which I like. I really like that system so far. But we'll keep experimenting with it. Hope you guys had fun. We had our first trek with diseases, and I'm not going to say who it is, but I will say that one of you is incubating something right now.
Oh, God.
Oh, who could it be?
Yay.
Someone failed their secret endurance check. I look forward to announcing when that occurs. Cold, make sure you have written down somewhere in your character sheet that you do have a festering wound that after today in game time will begin to resume symptoms. But after that, there's only 3 days left of it.
Okay.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yes. How many lunches worth of food did I get into my bag?
With how greedy were you being with that sleight of hand? Like, were you like a shoveling motion, or were you like picking up individual things motion?
Picking up individual things that wouldn't ruin my bag.
You get about 2 lunches worth. They're letter tight lunches by a halfling's
Alright.
perspective, but they're acceptable for lunches.
Good.
And we'll go over what's in the travel bags next time.
Okay.
Does anyone need anything? Or have any questions before I turn off the recording?
Um,
Did anybody successfully achieve an ambition?
Unless you count that as befriending Freda or Anders.
Not yet, but make a big reminder to ask Anders about the book at the start of next session. Hey,
no.
Ben, when did you spend a resolve point?
I spent a resolve point to become immune to psychology on the second round of the
Okay,
fight.
for reasons that I don't necessarily feel like explaining right now, you regain a resolve point based on your motivation.
Okay.
Dwarf's still doing fine. Verstat, what's your motivation? It's blank.
Motivation is kind of complicated. So motivation phrase is all wise men fear the rage of a patient man. So I basically have to lose my patience with someone.
Right. Ooh, man, you had to use your resolve later in the session. Okay, so you're still at 0. But you'll definitely get your chance soon. And then, Cole, did you spend your resolve this session?
No.
Okay. All right, so I think we're good. Good? Going once?
Good.
Good.
Going twice? Bye, everyone.